right away, I wanted to briefly touch on Occupy, because that is sort of a movement that sort of came and went and disappeared, and seems to have been, in my opinion, not properly digested by the culture quite yet. It doesn't seem to me that we really even understand what exactly that was about, why it failed, what the goals were that it didn't achieve. And it's interesting as well that the decentralized projects and organizations that you got involved with were offshoots of that. What lessons did you learn from the failures of the Occupy movement that were integrated later on into your work?
I'm having a little reaction to this framing about Occupy failing,
Well,
because that's a really popular narrative,
mhm.
and I think more than anyone, it's been people on the left that have told the story about how Occupy failed. I certainly didn't fail. It was like an incredibly developmental experience for me and for the people around me, and I see it as having made a major contribution to the people that I know personally, the course of their life, and for me that's enough. We were having conversations about what would it be like to live in a world beyond capitalism. We didn't make that happen, so in that sense we failed, to get rid of capitalism. But I don't. It's yeah. I don't know how useful the failure framing is, but I do absolutely agree with your sense that the important lessons, it hasn't been fully digested, and I'd love to digest it. I'd love that. Like, I often compare it to, in New Zealand there was a movement way back in the 80s. Basically, you have this New Zealanders love rugby, and there was a protest movement around rugby. So you've got the New Zealand All Blacks playing against the South African Springboks. And in South Africa at the time, you've got apartheid. And so some people start saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't be we should be boycotting South African sports teams because of the apartheid. And that, in the 80s in New Zealand, that was kind of like the most potent kind of source of conflict. And it was where the subculture was really suddenly visible. Like, wow, there's these people that think we should interrupt our sports for political reasons. And it was a really significant movement of trying to stop the South African tour through New Zealand. And for a few years after that movement, it was widely regarded as a failure, in the sense that they didn't stop the tour. The games went on eventually. They were interrupted by various things, but they didn't actually completely stop. But in its maturity 30 years later, and now we're like 40 years later almost, in its maturity, when the role that movement plays in New Zealand political context is, like, now they'll ask if there's a new potential political candidate, say a prime minister or something, their opinion on that tour at the time is used as a litmus test for, like, the test of their character. And retrospectively, it's become this watershed moment where it says, were you for or you were against? And if you were for, then we know something about who you are and what you believe. So I wonder if something similar might happen with Occupy, that it takes 20 years or 30 years to really fully digest that we are really in this phase, it seems. What you said about Occupy failing, that's not just you inventing that, right? Like, that's a meme, that's a story that's really popular. But I think the fully digested story will have something else in it, some more ingredients in it. And if I was the boss of history, the story that I'd emphasize there is about democracy. It's about, we did an experiment in democratic decision making, and we learned a lot. And it seems really important. Democracy, prior to Occupy, my experience of democracy was like a kind of bureaucratic, lifeless, quite ineffective system of occasionally voting for something. It was like this really dull, meaningless concept to me. After Occupy, democracy is like the most important thing I can think of, just about. It's this like essential, pulsating, lively developmental experience. And that discovery of what real democracy actually feels like and what it's good for. I'd love it if that was the story that we remembered from Occupy, you know.